All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep, deep into the world of time series regression. I mean, just imagine for a second predicting the future, not with like a crystal ball or something, but with, well, equations. Yeah, equations. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So you sent us some excerpts from EViews, Time Series Regression. Looks like a software guide or maybe even a textbook. And, well, let me tell you, it's absolutely packed with formulas and examples, especially having to do with economics.
Yeah, definitely seems like a solid resource for anyone who wants to learn how time series regression can be used to analyze and even forecast economic trends.
Right. So our mission today is to make sure you really grasp the core concepts of time series regression. We'll see how it can be used to analyze things like, consumer spending, GDP. Oh, and we'll even try to tackle how to interpret the results you get from these models.
It's really all about going beyond just describing what happened in the past and actually using that information to try to make informed predictions about the future.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What is a time series? I mean, it sounds kind of self-explanatory, but something tells me there's a little more to it.
You're right. There is more to it. Think about it. Any data that's collected over time forms a time series. It could be stock prices changing by the minute, or your city's rainfall measured each day, or even something like how many cups of coffee you have per week. It's all about data points that are unfolding over time.
Okay, so it's like a movie, not just a snapshot. So each data point is a frame in the film, and we're trying to understand the whole story.
Exactly. And what makes time series analysis so interesting is we can use those past frames to understand patterns, trends, seasonality, and ultimately try to make predictions about what might happen in the future.
Ah, so that's where the predicting the future part comes in. And our source here actually gives this example of analyzing consumer spending CS, they call it, based on, well, things like GDP. It also mentions using past consumer spending data itself, which, well, it seems a bit like cheating, doesn't it?
It might seem counterintuitive, but think about it. People's spending habits often have a certain inertia to them. What they spent last month or last year can be a pretty good indicator of what they'll spend in the coming months.
All right, I can see that, but how do we actually use this past data to predict? That's where regression comes in, right?
Exactly. Regression helps us figure out the relationship between variables. So in our consumer spending example, we would be looking at how GDP affects spending and also how past spending influences future spending.
And the strength and direction of that relationship is captured by something statisticians call the coefficient, right? So a positive coefficient for GDP would mean that as GDP increases, so does consumer spending.
Spot on. But here's where time series gets even more interesting. It has this concept called autocorrelation, meaning we're looking at how a variable is related to itself over time. Remember that CS1 term from the source?
Yeah.
That's consumer spending lagged by one period, meaning we're using the previous period's spending data as part of our prediction.
So we're not just looking at how GDP today affects spending today, but also how spending yesterday affects spending today.
That's exactly right. It's like saying that consumer behavior has momentum. Like what happened in the past kind of casts a shadow on the future.
Okay, this is starting to click, but then the source throws us a curveball. They give a sample regression output, and there's R-squared, t-statistics, Durbin-Watson. I mean, it gets a little overwhelming. Do we really need to understand all that to make, a decent prediction?
No, don't worry. We're not going to get lost in the numbers. But understanding these outputs is really key to knowing whether our model is actually reliable or just spitting out random numbers. So let's start with that R-squared value. It was 0.999625 in the example. That sounds pretty impressive, but is it?
Well, I remember from stats class that R-squared basically measures how well the model fits the historical data. The closer to 1, the better, right?
Yes, but there's a catch. While a high R-squared shows that the model explains the past really well, it doesn't guarantee it'll be good at predicting the future. And that's a very common trap for, beginners.
So a model that perfectly explains yesterday might not be so good at telling us about tomorrow. Okay, that's important. What else should we be looking at to assess the reliability of our time series model?
Well, the t-statistic can tell us whether the relationship between variables like GDP and consumer spending is actually statistically significant, or just due to random chance. A high t-statistic gives us more confidence that the relationship is real, not just noise.
So we want to see high t-statistics for the variables we're using to make predictions.
Exactly. We want to be sure those relationships are meaningful. And then there's the Durbin-Watson statistic. It helps us check for something called autocorrelation in the residuals. The difference between what our model predicts and the actual data.
So it's like a quality control check, make sure our model isn't missing any important patterns.
Precisely. We want our residuals to be random, like the static you hear on a radio when it's not tuned to a station. If there's a pattern in the residuals, it means our model isn't capturing everything it should be.
Okay, this is making a lot more sense now. But then the source mentions some more advanced techniques, things like autoregressive models, AR, and moving average models, MA. They sound a little intimidating.
They might sound complex, but they're really quite intuitive once you get the hang of them. Think of them as more specialized tools for capturing more subtle patterns in the data that a simple regression might miss.
Okay, I'm ready to upgrade my toolkit.
All right.
So can you give us a quick overview of how these models work?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got our basic regression toolkit now. We understand how to, assess a model's reliability. And now we're going to delve into those more, sophisticated, AR and MA models. So let's break them down.
Okay. Let's start with autoregressive models, or AR models for short. It's all about using past values of a variable to try to predict its future values. Remember lags?
Yeah, using data from previous time periods. So like an AR model is essentially saying, hey, if we know what happened last month or last year, we can use that information to get a better idea of what might happen next.
Exactly. And the number of lags we use kind of determines the complexity of our model. The source mentions an AR4 model, meaning it's using data from the past 4 periods to predict the current value.
So if we were trying to predict next month's sales figures, an AR4 model would look at the sales figures from the past 4 months.
That's right. And you could choose to use more or fewer lags depending on the kind of data you have and how far back you think past values have an actual influence.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this can capture more complex patterns than like a simple regression model. But what about moving average models or MA models? How are those different?
Well, MA models kind of shift the focus from past values to past forecast errors. Remember those residuals?
Yeah.
The difference between what our model predicted and what actually happened.
Yeah.
An MA model actually tries to find patterns in those errors and then incorporate them into future predictions.
So it's like learning from our mistakes, right? If the model consistently overestimates or underestimates, an MA model can adjust for that.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Like, hey, we didn't quite get it right last time, but we can use that to try to do better next time.
Okay, this is pretty cool. But then the source also mentions using AR and MA models together. What's the advantage of that?
Oh, that's where things get really interesting. When you combine AR and MA components, you get what's called an ARMA model. Stands for autoregressive moving average. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, right? You're using both past values and past errors to make even more sophisticated predictions.
So we're saying we're going to consider what happened in the past and how well we predicted it to get a clearer picture of the future.
You got it. And the source even shows how we can add another layer of complexity by incorporating seasonal adjustments directly into our ARMA model. Remember, those seasonal adjustments help us account for recurring patterns related to, specific times of the year.
Right, like how retail sales go up during the holidays. So we can have a model that considers both, the long-term trends and those predictable ups and downs.
Exactly. And by combining these different techniques, we can create models that are, increasingly powerful and capable of capturing all the nuances of, real-world data.
This is all starting to make sense, but I want to bring it back to our listener for a second. Why should they care about these kind of complex models? How can they apply this knowledge to their own lives?
Well, imagine you're a business owner, right? You're trying to forecast your sales for the next quarter so you can make sure you have enough inventory. Or maybe you're a financial analyst trying to predict stock prices based on historical trends. Time series regression can be incredibly useful for making those kinds of decisions.
So it's not just about understanding consumer spending on a national level. It's about understanding anything that changes over time, right? We could use these techniques to analyze climate change data, social media trends, even our own personal health metrics.
You got it. The source we're looking at focuses on economic data. But honestly, the applications are limitless. It's all about recognizing that time itself is a key factor in understanding how the world works.
Okay, I'm sold. But let's say our listener wants to dive in, start applying these techniques. What would be the first step?
Well, the first step is just, start paying attention to data that unfolds over time. Look for patterns, trends, seasonal fluctuations. Ask yourself, what stories is the data trying to tell? And there are tons of resources out there, online and libraries, to help you learn more about time series analysis and start experimenting.
So it's about like embracing that natural curiosity we all have about the world around us.
Exactly. And remember, there are a lot of software packages out there that can do the heavy lifting, the calculations. You don't have to do everything by hand.
So the deep dive has given us the map. Now it's up to our listener to go exploring. But before we let them go, I think we need to leave them with like one final thought-provoking question. What do you think? And welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into, well, time series regression. It's been a wild ride, huh?
Yeah, definitely a journey. We went from the basics of like what a time series even is to how we can actually use that past data to predict future trends using, those powerful models like AR and AMA.
Right, exactly. But before we wrap things up here, I want to make sure our listener really walks away understanding why this is so important. So what's the key takeaway? The so what of time series regression?
Okay, so the main takeaway is that time itself, time, is a crucial part of understanding and predicting how things actually change, It's not just describing what happened. Time series regression allows us to use that past data to find patterns, trends, relationships, and then, well, that can help us make smarter decisions about the future.
It's like saying the past isn't just history. It's a guide, right, for the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I like that. Now, our deep dives are also about leaving the listener with something to think about, a spark, something to ponder. So what thought-provoking question do you want to leave our listener with today?
Okay, well, the source material we looked at focused mainly on economics.
Yeah.
But I want you to think about all the other areas where this time series regression could apply. Take, for example, climate change. How can we use these techniques to analyze trends in, say, global temperatures or sea levels, or even extreme weather events over time?
That's a fantastic example. Or even like social media. Could we use these models to see how trends emerge and spread online? Or even predict what's going to go viral?
Yeah. See, the possibilities are endless. Think about your own habits even. Sleep patterns, exercise, your mood. Could you track those over time and then use time series regression to, get a better understanding of your own well-being?
Wow, it's like we've been given this brand new lens to see the world, huh? One that shows all the hidden connections and patterns within time itself.
I love that. And really, the source material we talked about is just the beginning. There's a whole world of data out there just waiting to be explored.
So the deep dive, it's given the map, the tools, the inspiration. Now it's up to our listener to go explore this amazing world of data that, well, unfolds over time. Who knows what you might find out there?
The important thing is to stay curious, never stop learning, and keep exploring.
Well said. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep those brains working and that data flowing.